A big welcome to you today to this witness seminar on the Peace Train organisation. I'm going to get out of the way shortly. Sometimes academics talk too long at these things. But I want to just say a few words of thanks first. Firstly to the Fellowship of Magazines Association, and especially Harry Donaghy, who's helped to bring this event together. And also the Irish Government's Reconciliation Fund, which is the main sponsor of all of our events today. I also, when introducing the Peace Train, I think a lot of people in this audience know, because they were participants, and we're very uniquely placed today to have so many of those who were involved with us. And I think that the history, character and personalities of the Peace Train will emerge from the panel and from the audience. And remember, there's a number of key members who were involved here and will be prioritised after we've heard from the main panel. I think, for those unaware, the Peace Train is a fascinating group which organises 7 trains between 1989 and 1995. And the main core campaign ethos of the Peace Train was to protest against the Provisional IRA's bombing of the train line from Belfast to Dublin, Dublin to Belfast, which was quite a regular feature for any of us who've used that service over the years and remember this. But there was also an interesting anti-paramilitarism aspect to it, and you can see on some of the Peace Train declarations on the wall some of the emphasis the group had, though also interesting tensions that emerge between the activities that people are involved with from committee members in different areas. And I think maybe we'll talk a bit more about that today. Genuinely cross-community, cross-border committees were formed in Belfast, Dublin and London, and indeed there was also some suggestion of one in Glasgow as well. Some ambitious and interesting projects. Representatives from the Ulster Unionists, I'm delighted the Gypsy Brothers are with us today, and the SDLP and the Workers' Party, Alliance, Greens, most Irish parties in the north and south of Ireland were represented in the Peace Train movement, which is a very unique thing. And again, enabling people, in their own words, on the island of Ireland to live their day-to-day lives free from political violence. And we are also interested in the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and in terms of a grassroots peace process. We know the Clintons and Biden are jetting in at the same time, and while political leadership is very important, and we know that when people like Albert Reynolds and John Major are out the way, and there are prime ministers and Taoiseach who care less about Northern Ireland, that sometimes it's not always in the headlines, but at the same time, the grassroots peace process on the ground is something which has to be built and maintained, and I think the Peace Train would be a group that I would put in that category. The witness seminar format's really very simple. The panel will take us through the first hour, ably chaired by Liz McManus, and crucially, very importantly, we then hand over to interventions from participants in the Peace Train, many of whom are assembled right in front of us. And please introduce yourselves when the microphone gets to you, and you can talk to us at a later point if you don't want that to be made public in the booklet that comes out of it. But equally, I think many people are keen to acknowledge the history of it. Some apologies. Seamus Lynch has what we say in Ireland, the COVID, so had to check out. Ken McHugh is in Dublin's Mater Hospital with a foot complaint and a bug. Joan Burton and Pat Carroll are abroad, but send their best wishes. John Cushnahan wanted to be here, but is taking his wife to the Ed Sheeran gig. Get your priorities right. Do take your wife to Ed Sheeran. And Sean Kenny, Paddy Crean, Philip McGarry, and former MP Harry Barnes, also quite frail these days, but couldn't make it, but should be mentioned. Liz is going to say a few in memoriams for us, but I think I'm going to hand over now to her.
Okay. Thanks very much indeed. First of all, I'd like to thank Connal and Stephen for organising the event, and thank all of you for being here. I would, first of all, I'd like to, as Connal has said, I'd like to remember those who are no longer with us who played such an important part. Sam McCautry, Paddy Devlin, Seamus Close, Sean O'Kearney, John de Courcy Ireland, Stephen Hilliard, Austin Curry, Terry Carlin, Anne Holliday, and Bert Ward. And I'd also like to just mention the women who appear in the little film of the 1992 train who danced outside City Hall and will be forever remembered. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the courage of the railway workers who kept the line open despite intimidation and the dangers that they endured. When I was asked to chair this event, I had to, or at least I found myself remembering the line in an old Cat, it shows how old I am, the Cat Stevens song, it's from the early 70s. Out of the edge of darkness, there rides the peace train. And it's clear, and I think every one of us here is aware of the fact that the peace process did not begin with secret talks and politicians' meetings. It began with the actions of brave people who stepped outside their comfort zone in order to seek it out. And today we can salute all of them. So I'm going to ask the first speaker and the person who actually had the idea in the first place. Are you okay if people stay sitting down? Yeah. I'll ask Proinsias de Rossa, is very well known to most of you. He's a former leader of the Workers' Party, an MEP for the Labour Party, Minister for Social Welfare, a great comrade of mine. Proinsias.
Thanks very much.
Here, do you want this?
Sorry, I don't need it. I think I'm hooked up here. I'm sorry I think I may have delayed things travelling by train, if you don't mind, from Dublin. But it wasn't the train that delayed me, it was the taxis at the other end. So really, it's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate that this event has been organised. I don't have any proprietorial claims to the peace train. I had an idea, which I'm sure others would have come up with eventually back in April 1989. I was quite angry at the way the train was being disrupted. My daughter was travelling on it every week up and down to Northern Ireland to go to college. And so I had a personal concern about it just as much as I had a political concern. So immediately I got the idea. I spoke to a number of people in the Workers' Party, and we formed a kind of an ad hoc committee, organising committee. It was never a Workers' Party decision to have a peace train or to organise a peace train. So the idea that in some way it was a front of the Workers' Party was quite nonsensical. But inevitably, claims and counterclaims are made. And in fact, the person I did speak to initially was Sean O'Kearney, who was one of those people who had an enormous capacity to gain media attention and to organise. And we discussed who we should invite to this, because I felt that it needed to be a non-party political event, but you couldn't exclude parties from it. But it needed to have broad political support as well as broad community support. And so we sort of rooted around and tried to think of names and so on and so forth. And one of the first people we asked who might be chair of it was Sam McCautry. And he readily agreed. He was quite happy to do that. I had met Sam McCautry for the first time about, I think, some years before I was elected, in fact, to the Dáil in 1981. He was a journalist with the Irish Times, and he followed me around Finglas South, and was the only journalist ever to predict that I might ever get elected. So I had a soft spot for Sam. But anyway, he was happy to do it. We talked to various other people, some of whom are here today, including yourselves, the Jimsy brothers as they became known, and others, Chris, of course, who was here, all of whom played an ongoing role in the process of organising the train. And the first train that was organised was in October, the end of October, I think it was the 28th of October 1989. We got as far as Newry. There was a bit of a protest there. Some Sinn Féin people protested, not against the peace train, incidentally, but sort of, troops out was what they were calling for. We got as far as Portadown, and then we were stopped because there was a bomb on the tracks, we were told. So there was a discussion amongst everybody on the train, and there was a broad consensus that we would stay put, that we weren't going to be driven off the train, that we would sit it out, we would wait for the line to be cleared, and we would continue our journey to Belfast and make the point that we had set out to make. If it was intended that this would be a way of aborting the process, it was a very poor calculation, because of course it lent huge publicity to the train, and it went from strength to strength after that. I have to say that because I was very conscious of the fact that I didn't want it to be identified as a Workers' Party front or anything else, or any other kind of a front, I stepped back from the frontline organisation of it. I continued to participate in it as far as I could, but others took over who are broadly non-party political, who took over the organisation of it. I'm not going to go on much more, because I think that's more or less. It seemed extraordinary. The reason I was angry about it was, as I mentioned, the personal interest I had in it, but also it just seems so counterintuitive that an organisation who was arguing for United Ireland was destroying the only rail link between north and south on the island, interfering with people's capacity to socialise, to move around the island, to work, politically organised, etc., etc. It just did not seem to make sense. And I was just rereading the Dáil debate. We had an all-party motion the following April, I think it was, or was it March? Might have been the end of March. We had an all-party motion in the Dáil where all of the parties in the Dáil signed a common motion calling for the campaign to close the line to stop. And two speakers in that debate, Rory Quinn and I think it was Mickey Bell, argued very strongly that there was a kind of mafioso kind of connection with the bombing of the train, that it wasn't political, that it was to do with money, to do with raising funds and so on, that there were commercial interests involved. I don't know. I never had any evidence for that, and I have no idea whether that's true or not. But politically, it seemed to me to be incomprehensible. And the bombing and the bomb scares continued for some time after the peace train got underway. But I would argue that, in fact, because people spoke to me afterwards about it and were critical of me because they felt that we were undermining the Republican movement's efforts to unite Ireland by having the peace train or organisation. And we debated this and we talked about it and so on and so on. And I feel that the peace train, in both its initial form and indeed eventually as the peace train organisation, had a significant effect on people's thinking, on both within the broad public arena, but also in the Republican movement itself. I have no doubt that it made a contribution to the rethinking that eventually all got underway when they realised that in fact there was no support for the campaign of violence that was underway. In 1989, I was elected to the Dáil, not for the first time, it was a few elections, but I was elected to the European Parliament at the same time as the Dáil. But I was just looking at the figures, and Sinn Féin in that election had something less than 2% of the vote. And I have no doubt at all that that was because of the way in which they were pursuing being connected with or associated with the IRA campaign. I think I will leave it at that, and then if things come up in the course of the debate or the discussion, we can deal with them. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Proinsias. Okay, the next speaker is Eileen Bell, former Alliance MLA, Deputy Leader of the Alliance Party and Stormont Speaker, and she was the peace train's administrator in Belfast. That was your official title, was it?
Coordinator administrator
in Belfast.
I was just a workaholic.
Okay, Eileen, there you go.
There we go.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today, and I thank Connal and his friends, shall I say, in organising this. It was lovely to come here this morning. I know it made me feel very old, but it's great to see everybody here. I'm not sure about Michael. he and I have long memories, but it was great to see the two of us coming together. And that was one of the things that I liked about the Peace Train when I first started, that it was a coming together of everybody for the one aim. And I had joined it at the first, but then I was around the time that Jeff decided to leave, or was leaving. I was starting my political career as well. I was involved in the council elections and got a seat in North Down, where I was at the time. And I also was a delegate in one of the first peace political talks in Stormont under St Ninian Stephen. It's a name. I don't remember names usually, but I did remember that one. So being in Peace Train was actually a wonderful experience for me, because it was coming to people who were from different backgrounds, different everything. But the one thing that we agreed on was we had to stop this attempt to ruin the rail line between Belfast and Dublin, our two main cities. We didn't want to do that, and it turned out that a lot of people in Ireland, north and south, didn't want that to happen either. Every Peace Train, as administrator, it was difficult to organise, and one of the reasons it was difficult was because even from the beginning we had a lot of support from the public, north and south, because of the good work done by people like Proinsias, etc. down in and Chris, you were down in the south at that stage, weren't you?
Yeah.
And
no,
they
we
did.
sent them up here.
Oh no, I know, but later on you did. We have to stick with them now. But we all worked together, but none of us. I can't remember anybody actually querying things. I could ask. There were sort of people, they might have queried, but they wouldn't have actually spoken against it. They would maybe give another perspective. But as Proinsias has said to you, in the end we realised we had one aim, and we wanted to get that aim, and the best way to do it was still getting the people to support us. As a peace activist, I think I was known as before the political sense. I attended many peace people rallies, many rallies from trade unions, etc. And we didn't have the effect on the men and women of violence. We didn't have that effect. But I have to say that the Peace Train did have that effect again, as I think you said at the end. But we had support from the beginning from overseas. I think Mrs. I can't remember her name, Kennedy, she was the ambassador, the USA ambassador, and as I say, a lot of people over in Westminster, people in Scotland, all around, and the support from every political party across Ireland, bar one. And we just started to work at it when we saw that the people were going to work with us, and like Topsy, it grew and grew. And every year that we decided to have it, we nearly had to add on another train. And such was the support from all round. I personally love to go through all the trains and talk to people. And the people were literally from everywhere. And they were even people from Germany. I met quite a number of people from Germany, so the word had got round. And it was great to know, as then I was beginning to be a politician as well, it was great to know that when you went among these people, they actually talked about they had much the same perspective as I had as regards trying to talk through and get peace in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. But it was, the passengers all had the one aim, and I felt that this is the Peace Train. This is the nearly the leading light of the Peace Train, that we were all together and we're very fulsome in all our support. My lasting memory of the trains was that the unity and the purpose of every person who travelled the trains, who helped organise them, they had a great sense of success when the bombing actually stopped. We had many rallies, as I said, throughout the Troubles, but the Peace Train really did hit the mark for some reason or another. You would know better than I would at that stage. But the one train that I want to talk to you about today is the very last train, I think it was in 1994, Jeff will keep me right, which was previously arranged. We had arranged it, we were getting people tickets for it, and then the Shankill Road bombing came. And I was extremely concerned about what we were going to do, because we'd already had, as I say, lots of people coming asking for tickets on the train. So I had a couple of people that I had been working with in the community sense on Shankill Road who were also at that time looking after the people who were directly affected in the Shankill Road. Someone like, I don't know, you might know Mina Mordal, and she was helping them. She was a psychoanalyst. She was a very, very, very good community worker, and her son. And I went up and talked to them and asked them about, would you ask the people there? And she said, no, come on in and talk to them yourself. So I explained what we did. They'd heard of it. They'd heard the previous trains, and they were saying, look, are you sure that the people of the South will come up? I said, yes, I am, because they're already coming to us for tickets. And they said, well, yes, let it go. And it'll be like a show of complete support from all the islands and all the people on the train, the support against what happened up on the Shankill Road. And I have to say, it's in my memory and will be there always. It was the usual programme when we got off the train at Lanyon, what's now Lanyon Place, to march round to the City Hall. And we always had the complete cooperation of whoever was mayor or whoever was in the City Hall. I think it was Reg MP at that time. I think it was Reg, or it might have been you, Tom. It was Reg. Might have been Reg. I think it was Reg. And he literally opened the City Hall to people, bring them in. And he also allowed us, because as we were walking round, I realised nearly every person in it must have been thousands upon thousands, Chris, I'm sure you remember it that day, where there were, every one of them had some sort of a flower thing, some sort of a flag up saying we support. And when we arrived down at the City Hall, Reg had already arranged that the staff would go and take the bouquets and all, because I was worried what were we going to do with them. And they literally covered the whole of the City Hall, flowers, the gardens, and that was a sight to see. We also got, the Lord Mayor of Dublin was on the train, and he went up with a few people from the Shankill up to what is now the Garden of Remembrance, but it was just the start of it. And they went up with a wreath for that and a placard, and again to show their support. It was, as I say, it was something, everybody that was attached to that train, everybody who was on that train, had brought something to show their support. And that was magnificent as far as I'm concerned. I'll finish as well by remembering the two people that we've all mentioned already, Paddy Devlin and Sam McAutry, two men who were, to me, the best people that I could have on a committee to help us. I'm not saying anything about the others, but you understand what I mean about them. They had such vision, which was very lacking in the other area of public work that I was doing. It's such vision, it's such a knack of being able to agree. Everybody was able to sit and agree about things that were coming. And we didn't know that we were going to have the success that we did. We thought people might think we're silly, but actually once they realised it, they helped tremendously. And they're men who were popular, had already made themselves popular, whose reputation went before them. And I have to say, and I don't think any man in here, I hope none of you will be annoyed when I say, they really don't make people like that anymore. I won't say any more because I'd start to cry, and I don't want to be on this here, a woman starting to cry about it. But I also like to think someone who maybe some of you remember, but not June McClung, who was a friend of Sam's and came to help me because, of course, we didn't have a lot of funding and there was only me and her, and she was brilliant. She's now gone as well. But just generally what I say in finishing, that the peace train to me was a light to everybody, and I just don't mean in the UK or in Ireland. I just want to thank everyone who was there in the great days, every person who travelled on the trains, on working together on that common purpose of ending violence. And I'm so grateful to you, Connal, that we've been given this opportunity to be here to meet people and to remember what happened. It was a wonderful time in my life, and I will never forget it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Okay, the next speaker then is Gary Kent, Labour Party member, international relations expert. He worked in Parliament for 34 years and is one of the advocates for the new dialogue, new consensus. Gary.
Thanks very much. It's nice to be back. I haven't been here for a few years and to see some old friends, though I haven't quite forgiven the young man in the pub who called me old boy. I wasn't expecting that one. And I'm sort of also bringing a sort of different perspective, or an additional perspective, which is from England, and it will relate to the impact I think that this peace activity had on the left in GB. I mean, if I'm honest, if you told me as a teenage leftist back in the 70s, I'd be here, sort of having worked with bedfellows in many parties on both sides of the Irish Sea to defeat the IRA, I'd have been a little surprised, because when I got active in 76, the sort of default position was that partition was the problem, unity was the solution. And it was quite widespread on parts of the left. I remember in 79, when Eileen Bell had just been blown up in the Commons, having an argument with this guy who basically said, look, I question troops out. And he said, well, look, there's a bloodbath going on now, let's get it over and done with. Now, we were in Brighton, a rather long way from Belfast. And I think, you know, the idea of fighting to the last drop of someone's blood started to turn for me, and I thought that was wrong. And then I started working in the Commons in 87 with Harry Barnes, who went on to play a very prominent role in Northern Ireland matters. And we fell increasingly into the orbit of Northern Ireland affairs. I blame Henry Robinson if he's, yeah, there he is. Then, you know, the main initiatives from the late 80s onwards were Families Against Intimidation and Terror, New Consensus, New Dialogue, and the Peace Train. And we were quite tough-minded. When I say we throughout this talk, the we will change at different times. And it's not that I'm trying to cover it up, it's just I can't remember quite what happened in the 80s and 90s. It all sort of blends together. But, you know, we try to be tough-minded. So, for instance, there was a big campaign on Bloody Sunday. So we took it on. And I remember that we organised what we called a Presence for Peace near a Troops Out march in Islington. And we stood at the side of the road with placards that said, no more Bloody Sundays, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. And I think that the Glasgow Republican flute band that marched past us with berets and bomber jackets and drum beat and IRA weren't very keen on us for some reason, because we'd stolen their thunder. Now, it's been said that there were 7 trains, and there certainly were 7 trains north-south, but there were 8 trains overall, because the other one, which was big for us when we'd formed the Peace Train organisation, was the Belfast-Dublin-London Peace Train in June 1991. And I remember sort of it arrived one morning from memory, Proinsias, Seamus Lynch, Maurice Healy, who'd been tortured by the IRA, Harry Barnes, Kevin McNamara spoke. And it was delightful because the Troops Out movement picketed us. I mean, how stupid can you get? I mean, it was hilarious. I mean, they shot themselves in the foot, which is better than other people kneecapping. And then we took buses to the Commons, provided by another union, because the unions had helped us to get access to British Rail and to ease the process of the train. And the transport workers put on a couple of traditional buses. We went to the Commons. There was a debate that Harry had organised with Brian Mawhinney. Now, it wasn't always easy. Money was tight. A peace plane to America we talked about, but it never took off. No groups in Great Britain had received state funding, but you know, that didn't stop us being accused of being sort of Brit fronts, basically. And so a couple of MPs you may have heard of, Ken Livingstone and Jeremy Corbyn, tabled a hostile amendment to a Commons motion. We were talking about New Consensus and Bloody Sunday. And they demanded to know how much we'd got from the state and what were the strings. Well, there weren't any. There's no money, no strings. I mean, it was ludicrous. And the peace train had a summit here in Belfast in October 91 and basically concluded, look, we're not being guided by any funding, we're doing nothing wrong, and it's not an issue that we should concern ourselves with. We were inevitably sometimes amateurish. The posters that Chris has, we launched those at a hotel near the Doyle. I'm afraid I was the one that spotted that they had the wrong dates on them, so they had to be scrapped. We visited the Irish president, and we're all of us a bit sort of media savvy, but none of us had a camera. Unfortunately, a young woman soldier did. But the other part of what happened, and this wasn't planned and all these activities were separate, is that we sort of created a more informed network of people. Bear in mind, the internet was in its infancy. Newshound was quite important at aggregating stories, but you had to go out of your way to sort of know what was going on, especially if you're a long way away. So we produced a monthly digest on Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that got a big audience and it connected us. And then you see the other impact, though this wasn't the plan, there wasn't a plan as such, but this is what happened, is that some of us in the Labour Party started to challenge its anti-partitionist default position. It had seemed initially solid, but that was sort of mainly due to romanticism and inertia, and it needed a nudge. And it's important to say that the fact that parts of the Irish left were far less nationalistic than parts of the British left really started to make a difference. And our position, Labour's position, was ambiguous. It was unity by consent. Now, some people focused on the consent, some people focused on the unity. But it made us difficult partners for unionists. So some of us started to engage with the unionists, and Chris and Michael in particular were very important in that process. And I mean, I'm going to tell a joke because it was great at the time, but they had an important impact. They changed the way that people thought about unionists, who were seen as rather dour people who, sort of thought we were loyal to the UK, why is this being questioned? And they didn't really network. And Michael addressed the big Tribune rally at the Labour Party conference and then Chris was there.
It was me that addressed it.
You addressed it?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Okay, a slight mistake. Right, shall we start again? Chris addressed the Tribune rally and deployed a topical joke at the time, which was, what's the difference between Jerry Adams, who was on the platform, and Jerry Halliwell? Younger viewers may need to be reminded that Jerry Halliwell was with a certain girl band at the time. Anyway, the line, the joke that Chris delivered, apologies, was, Jerry really has left the Spice Girls. It's a brilliant line. I mean, I think I'd nicked it from Liam Clark, who sort of had it in the Sunday Times. So that was a sort of joke of the time. And there was a sort of sharp intake of breath and then laughter. Now, basically, Adams was completely flustered. And this is slightly ironic. And he got Chris and Michael confused. Well, he's not the only one, is he? So I think, this sort of showed that there was something changing. And then we're talking about 94 now, and Blair was elected as the Labour leader. And basically the changes that some of us have been arguing for neutrality on the border, comprehensive reform, not focusing on unity being the first and foremost issue, that was taken on. And so he replaced Kevin McNamara, who was a decent principled veteran, but very established of the view that partition was a problem, with Mo Mowlam. And her first public meeting was with New Dialogue, and Michael Ancram, the political minister, followed suit. Now, why I'm saying this isn't just an arcane internal matter. It had an impact, because the defeat of old-time anti-partition sentiment bolstered John Major's peace process, and then the Belfast Agreement, because if, Labour had been not trusted by the unionists, that wouldn't have been the continuation of the process. And I mean, there were some laughable rearguard actions because we weren't very popular at times because we were taking away some people's toys and they didn't like it. And we organised to distribute shamrocks in the Commons on St Patrick's Day when there were Northern Ireland questions. And Frank Miller then wrote of the Irish Times, wrote a piece a few days later saying this had been scuppered by what he called a quick-witted but nationalist-minded aide. I've no idea, who thought this was some sort of unionist plot. I mean, how that could be, I don't know. And Harry Barnes, Peter Bottomley, wrote to the Irish Times, said, well, you know, the next time that pop is circulated in Dublin, we'll say this is a Republican plot, shall we? In conclusion, I mean, you know, it wasn't easy, especially here, to defy warmongers. It was a strength that it was bipartisan, multi-partisan. In England, that caused no problem because there was a lot of continuity between Major and Blair. It was also hyphenated, north, south, east, west, first, second, third generations. And I would say that, and the reason I pushed this for some time as an idea was to rescue an issue that's been neglected, forgotten, but which was important. And I think it's a source of great pride that ordinary people from, he's getting his revenge, from Northern Ireland, and Great Britain, north, south, east, west, added their voices to the various measures by British and Irish governments and others that ended the Troubles. That unity of Irish and British people made it crystal clear that the IRA had no mandate for the Irish people, and the same applied to the so-called loyalists. Politicians who concluded the deal, and we know that Byrne and the Clintons are coming here, and so they should, they stand on the shoulders of giants who defied terror and were vindicated. And it was a great honour to have been involved for so many years in this with so many of you, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Gary. The next speaker is a north-south cross-border body in himself. Reverend Chris Hudson, Unitarian minister, trade union activist for the Postal Union. He was also an intermediary between loyalist groups and the Irish government during the early 1990s. And I'm sure he's a lot to say.
Thank you.
Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Liz. And it really is great to be here today and to see Eileen and Proinsias and so many other people that I haven't seen for such a long time. I think the most important thing to say about the peace train, irrespective of any of our political views, any position we might take on the national question, is the peace train meant nothing without the ordinary people on the peace train. Sometimes we forget that it was the hundreds of ordinary folk that climbed on board those peace trains between Dublin and Belfast that put meaning in the peace train. And why I say that, because I remember in particular one peace train, and Morning Ireland did a little piece before we left the station. And one Dublin woman actually said she had taken out her will, that she had written her will that morning before getting on the train and left it on the kitchen table. Remember that, Eileen? And they were the sort of people that were the backbone of the peace train. The hundreds of ordinary, thousands of ordinary working class people from Dublin and from Belfast. And the other thing that was important, I think somebody mentioned that, Eileen, you mentioned, there was a manifestation at different times of different peace groups, and they all got caught on the one bugbear. And that was all the provisional IRA had said to them, are you against all violence? And they would crunch and say, oh yes, we're against all violence. And we'll get cornered into spending the rest of the time condemning security force violence. We were a little bit smarter than that. We said we are against all violence, but we're in particular against yours on the railway line, because we, like you, are a single issue campaign. This is about the train. This is about the peace train. But then we had the ability to get off the train and talk on every other issue. And then when they came to ask us other questions, we got back on the train and said, sorry, we're a single issue campaign and we're only talking about the peace train. So, but there's a number of people I would like to say thank you to. First of all, my own union at the time, the Communication Workers Union, because without the unions, there was no peace train. The CWU, David Begg, who was General Secretary, and then Con Scanlon, basically allowed me to use the CWU headquarters to be essentially in Dublin, the headquarters of the peace train, where we had administration through the union staff. And we took stick from that from some of our own members who objected to what we were doing. So there were lots of other people like that who gave their support. And I'm looking at Henry Robinson sitting there. And Henry, how we linked up with Families Against Intimidation and Terror. And Michael from New Consensus. And sadly, Anne's not with us today. And that was so important that all those groups came together. And one group that should never be forgotten was the Families of the Disappeared. The peace train were the first people to give a platform to the families of the disappeared in Boswell's Hotel in Dublin. And then myself and Sam brought the families to the Peace and Reconciliation Forum in Dublin Castle and challenged Sinn Féin there with members of the families of the disappeared. So all those groups were able to climb aboard the peace train, make their point, and actually advance with us. And I'm looking at Fergus and Sheila there as well. Again, trade union people, because to a large extent it was union members who were the backbone of the peace train. Tom Carew. I have some of the posters there, Liz, that we can look at later on. And I'm looking at the flags here and all the tickets that were produced, because people paid $5 to go on the peace train, and we had to print the tickets. And Isabella did all that printing, making these flags. My home was a silk screening industry during the years of the peace train. And one person that's not with us sadly today, Sean O'Coney, and Proinsias mentioned Sean of the Workers' Party. Sean O'Coney was one of the most able people you could have on board. The work that he did. The way he was able to glad handle everybody at Connolly Station. And not only that, but Sean, and I still miss him to this day, became one of my closest friends. Ní bheidh go le héad a rís ann. We will never see his like again. And Gary mentioned the peace train to London, and it was somewhat ironic that the Troops Out movement picketed everybody, including the Irish Countrywomen's Association, who were with us on that day. And I just want to, Proinsias, you touched on something, and it is very important, about maybe sinister elements, more sinister than the Provost, that were trying to get rid of the railway line. Tony Tobin, was Tony General Secretary of the...
No, he was Assistant Secretary.
Yeah. Tony, in a lovely little interview with a little video from RT in the RT archives, talks about that the Enterprise train was down to 50 people a day travelling on the Enterprise from 350. Now, I have learned recently from a historian, the plan was to close down the railway line, to get rid of the Dublin-Belfast link. Now, I don't have evidence of that, Proinsias, but I believe this. I did a radio programme with Chris Conway, who is the Chief Executive of TransLink, and this other historian, and it was the anniversary of the Enterprise train. And there is evidence there for some investigative journalists to find that the point was to close down the railway line, and in particularly to force freight off the railway line. And so you're right, Proinsias, there was something else sinister happening there. Now, I just want to finish up by mentioning two things. Hughie Jordan has forgotten the song that he sang at Connolly Station. But Hughie, I think you're going to sing another one today. I don't know why you forgot that one, but you sang it loud and clear at Connolly Station. And I remember, and I have here, but unfortunately I don't have a player, Pete St. John's, I took the train to Belfast. And you know, one thing somebody said, we can't allow them to have all the best music. And we can't allow them to have all the best poems. That's why we got Hughie Jordan. And we got Pete St. John. And Dorgan, what's his name, the poet? Paul Durkin wrote a poem. So we managed to pull in people from arts and music to actually be symbols of the peace train and to be the artistic wing of the peace train. But I just want to mention some ordinary folk who probably don't know we're meeting here today. People like Joe Heaps, who was a cleaner in the GPO, who manned every peace train between Dublin. Alice Leahy, a little Dublin woman from Ballyfermot. Michael Rice, who was a trade union in Dublin, who got involved. Rhonda Donaghy. And also, I want to just reference Chris McGimsey. I know Michael, but the brother was sharper in some ways. Chris, the reason I sat down with the UVF was thanks to Chris McGimsey. I think he said too much at a dinner party in Dublin, which equally helped, but it was the link that ended up the Dublin government informally speaking to the UVF. And that was thanks to you, Chris. And it was thanks to that David Irvine eventually sat down with me and we were able to work towards the loyalist ceasefire. And if you look at one of the peace train posters, we always claimed we had no paramilitaries on the peace train posters. But Gusty Spence reassured me his name is on one of the posters as he said, I don't say Commander-in-Chief of the UVF, it's just Gusty Spence. And through that, Chris, and I thank you for doing that because that was highly important. And yes, there was a Glasgow peace train, and we did meet in Glasgow, and the peace train held an event in Glasgow. And the greatest compliment, and I finish on this, the greatest compliment paid to us, I was at a reception in Ivy House with Eamon Gilmore when he was Minister for Foreign Affairs, and Jerry Adams was sitting in front of me. And Jerry turned around and said to me, Chris Hudson of the peace train, yeah. He said, you know, you guys were a feckin' pain in the arse. And I said, thank you, Jerry, that'll do fine.
Okay, last but not least, Bernard C. Byrne, former Enterprise train driver and trade union member, and he was also one of the first drivers to drive the first DART trains.
Thank you. And if I might say, that episode will be the feature of a special nationwide programme on RTE on the 19th of April, and the recordings were done only last week. So I'm really pleased to be here today, and I thank Chris and Stephen for the invitation. To say to you that, in fact, the times of the operation of the enterprise over the years, and I might add of the freight trains out of Dundalk, were extremely difficult. I must say to you that the Northern Line, Dublin, Belfast, and indeed you could go all the way down to Wexford, must be one of the loveliest stretch of railway lines, not only in Europe, but in the world. And indeed, as you go north and you cross the various rivers, you come to Dundalk and then head up, and I'm talking about a lovely summer's day, and you have the Mourns on the right, and you have Slieve Gullion on your left as you go through. It's like a valley. The scene is beautiful, but I have to tell you, leaving Dundalk on a winter's afternoon with the Enterprise, and you left at about 3:30, you were heading into the mountains, you were heading into the mist, and you were heading virtually into the unknown. And you know, the local driver travels on his own and drives on his own, except when you would have your supervisor with you. And that would take place on a regular basis. But driving north or south on a winter's evening was foreboding in its own way, because it wasn't that you were on the, if you like, the verge of fear, but you were conscious of the fact that anybody who was indeed opposed to the railway line and the service being provided could literally be our enemy, and could also, you know what I mean, in the circumstances, take our life. I'm very conscious of the fact that, and I think now of the Dundalk drivers, because they done all of the freight, that quite a number of them, their trains were hijacked and blown up. And the impact on that, on a member of the crew of a locomotive, with a bomb going off underneath you, some of them never worked again. And I think, and today helps in many ways, that their contribution to the freedom of movement was paramount to our continued operation and indeed opportunity to be able to travel almost at times with great difficulty between Dublin and Belfast and vice versa. And I'm certainly conscious of that, and I would have known drivers and indeed train guards who were traumatised by that experience. And I'll just give you a little quote that was made to me. Now, it wasn't on the Enterprise, but it was on another train, that the train was stopped and was being hijacked. And this individual got up and said to the driver, "I want the train moved back." And the driver said to him, I don't have the authority. And the individual says, "I have the authority," and he put a gun to his head. Move. Now, that's just kind of an example of what you could be confronted with. But the point is that the line as such was almost, in some cases, daily being attacked. And indeed, the attacks would take place involving freight trains, passenger trains, and indeed, as you said, I worked on the Enterprise out of Connolly for quite a long number of years, and indeed would have been conscious of the kind of threats that existed. But when in the early 70s there was a big question mark over whether the service should be operated by the crews at all and putting themselves in danger, that in fact was challenged. And indeed, at the time, I might add, I had become in 1973, and I was a locomotive driver, but I became the branch secretary for all of the locomotive drivers in our union in the Dublin area, which amounted to about 120 and some other ancillary staff. And the challenge was, that we shouldn't participate in the service. And indeed, in the debate, I had to put it to people that we're not just providing the train service, we are giving people the right to freedom of movement. And that to me, and I'm sure to everybody here, is a basic human right. And had we relinquished, if you like, our contribution to the service, then there would be no service. And in case anybody might think that the drivers were paid some kind of danger money or responsibility money or anything else, the drivers got nothing above and beyond our basic rate of pay, with one exception. The company gave them a daily meal allowance, and I think that daily meal allowance was £2.05. And the reason being that you could be out shipped and you mightn't get home till 1 or 2 in the morning. And that payment was purely made for food, for no other reason. And the point is that in the, if you like, the years that went on, I'd have to tell you, my record for disruption was 3 bomb scares in the one trip. Now, I must say to you that, again, in the sense of the, if you like, the contribution of the railway workers, and I go for all grades, and including, if you like, management, that I will say in all honesty that never was there such a, if you like, a class of solidarity insofar as the work was concerned. Because I was trained for the enterprise, and you'll find this hard to believe, most of my training for the enterprise were done with drivers out of Belfast and Portadown, which you might think is a bit unusual, but there was that kind of solidarity, and indeed people would remember Jimmy Donnelly and others whom I had a great relationship with. Lord be good to Jimmy. But again, the whole idea of providing the service, you know, was one of paramount importance. And Chris, you made a point there about the future of the Belfast line. Well, I can tell you and our audience today that as a member of the board of CIE in 1987, elected by the workforce, I might add, the issue of the Northern Line came up, and the first go-off was to single the line from Portadown to the point where, in fact, it would join up with Irish Rail, which would really have meant Dundalk. And I can say in all honesty that on that, if you like, proposal, I was totally opposed to it and made my views known, bearing in mind that I was able to say, if you single the line, you will destroy it, because the fact that the line itself had a tremendous future. And we'll say, moving on from that, I was a delegate to the International Transport Federation in Florence in 1990, and Jimmy Knapp was the chairperson for RM. Well, it was still NUR at that stage. Later in 1990, it became RMT. And I said to Jimmy, will you allocate on one of the, if you like, sessions an opportunity for me to speak on the future of the Northern Line? And he said, I will. There were 2,500 delegates present from all over the world. And I was able to say what was happening on the Northern Line, on the, if you like, the dangers that existed for the railway workers, which was unprecedented for railway workers in Europe. And it was important that, if you like, the railway and transport community worldwide would be aware that we wanted the survival of the line. And I have to say, and again I come down now to the peace train movement, which I was a great supporter of. But in December 1989, a peace rally was held in Dundalk. And the railway workers from Belfast and the railway workers from Dublin and members of the public came together in Dundalk, had a protest march to Oriel Park, and the whole question of the future of the line, and I might add the peace train movement, was again as part of the process being made known to the public. And I thank you, Liz, for your patience. Thank you.
Sadly, 2 months ago, Noel Playfair, who drove the first peace train, died 2 months ago.
Okay, well, we'll certainly add him to the roll of honour. Okay, now we have a song.
So, I chose this song because I remember everything about the peace train. I was delighted to be associated with it. And as Proinsias was saying, it was the kind of ordinariness of people wanting to buy a ticket and expect to arrive in Dublin. That was just normal. So, and I was aware as the campaign moved on that this was winnable. And I watched it all the way, I watched it grow, and I was on several of the peace trains. I wasn't in them all, but I knew it was winnable, and eventually it was right. It was great to be associated with that. So it was this, where you can work away at a little thing, like buying a ticket for the train, and it works. So I've chosen this song for you today. It's called Little Things Mean a Lot. Blow her a kiss from across the room. Say she looks nice when she's not. Touch her hair when you pass her chair. Little things mean a lot. Give her your arm when you cross the street. Call her at 6 on the dot. A line a day when you're far away. Little things mean a lot. And you don't have to buy her diamonds and pearls, champagne, sables and such. She doesn't care much for diamonds and pearls. She'll laugh and say, honey, they just cost money. Give her your hand when she's lost her way. Give her your shoulder to cry on, and whether the sky is sunny or gray, give her your heart to rely on. Give her the warmth of a secret smile, show you haven't forgot. That's always and ever, now and forever. Little things mean a lot. Little things mean a lot. That's always and ever, now and forever. Little things mean a lot. Little things mean a lot.
Thanks very much indeed, Harry. I'm going to open it up now for a discussion, but we've certainly had a wonderful array of reminiscences and commentary from the panel. But the first people I'd like to ask maybe for a comment are Chris McGimsey and Michael, so maybe if you'd start there.
Well, thanks very much. I've enjoyed this. It's brought back happy memories, I'm sure, for all of us. I've never been in a place before where you look at somebody and you say, Christ, they remind me of somebody. And then you say, oh, I know who they remind me of. They remind me of what they looked like 30 years ago. And I wonder if then they're looking at me saying, who the hell's that guy? Seamus Close rang me one day. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Seamus Lynch rang me one day and said to me, we've been discussing with Proinsias de Rossa about the train. And we're going to have a meeting. Would you and Michael come down? And I said, well, I have to ring Michael. If he's free, I'm sure he will. And we went down to a meeting in the Gresham. And it was very positive. God, there were about 40 or 50 there. Very, very positive. And everybody thought we're going to have to do something. This can't be left to go on. We were on. And I went away, never heard another dicky bird. And after about 2 weeks, I rang Seamus up and I said, Seamus, that was a tremendous idea. What's happening? Nobody. Oh, he says, everybody's very busy. Hold on. I said, I think we should get it moving, get a committee set up and get started. He rang me back about half an hour later. He said, I was talking to Proinsias. He says he agrees entirely and you're the man to do the committee. And that then talked me into a job, and Michael and I, and we started. So the very first committee was a lot of people were basically friends of ours, friends of mine. I mean, I remember one of the first person rang was Liam Kennedy, and we're friendly with the Queens, and we moved on with other people, and it built up. And obviously the rest, there's no point in me going through it, all the rest is kind of like history. But one of the things that I remember is, and Chris has referred to it, and so has Gary. And thank you for those comments, by the way, Chris. There were a number of groups set up at that time, and if, like me, you're probably involved in all of them. And it was surprisingly how small the number of people were. You could have taken 4 from the Peace Train and 4 from somewhere else, and that was such and such a committee. Or 4 from Fate and 4 from somewhere else, and that was New Consensus. It really was a small group. We were all wearing different hats, but we're all really selling the same message, and that was important. And that's still important today. And I think that's, remember, we're having this meeting today, and it's important. Remember A.J.P. Taylor, when he was asked about oral history, and this is what it is. He says, oral history, old men drooling about their past? Nah, never catch on. And that was A.J.P. Taylor. And there is an element of that here, because we're all old men and old women, and I suppose we are some of us are drooling and some of us aren't. But it's because of the message, and the philosophy of the Peace Train is still important. And that's why I think it's important that we're here and that this is involved. I'll give you one funny story. Well, you might remember, and God forbid she was murdered by loyalists, Mary Drum. Mary Drum was vice president of Sinn Féin. And the Drum family were icons in West Belfast. And she once spoke at a rally of Republicans and said, we will take Belfast apart brick by brick. And somebody, I'd like to say it was me, it wasn't. Somebody came up with the idea, he says, that's what we'll do for the next Peace Train. We will build peace brick by brick. And I thought that was a great idea. So we needed bricks. And there was 2 guys, I don't even know who they were. They could be in the room, I don't know who they were. But somebody told me they were from Tala. And they got a big pile, they got 6 or 8 bricks. And we got them all decorated, with Peace Train on them. And we were going to stop at every station, and we were going to present a brick to the mayor of each conurbation, and they were going to say, you're helping us now to build peace, brick by brick. There's your brick, let's move on. Well, anyway, so they had to get a taxi, and they got a taxi. The taxi driver gets them up early in the morning. 2 of them get in the back. One gets in the front, one gets in the back, and the other, he puts a big bag of bricks in the back. And the taxi man's talking, so where are you going? Oh, we're going to early today, boys. I said, we're taking that Peace Train up to Belfast. And he said, all right, I heard about that. It's a good idea. He was supportive. He said, what are you doing up there? He says, we're going to a peace rally. And then he says to them, tell me, what are the bricks for? Well, he said, I told you we're going to a peace rally. And he said, the driver turned around and looked at me and says, Christ, they do things differently in the north, don't they? And I think that is right. We did do things differently in the north, and we did them differently in Dublin as well. And because we did things differently, Sam McCautry had a great thing. He says, we're the only group that ever took the provisional IRA on. They used gelignite, we used brain matter, and we won. And we're the only group in Ireland that can achieve that. And I don't know whether that's true, that it is, but the message is quite clearly there, and that's what we achieved. And the trains are still... I heard at that time, Chris, just in this last point, you talked to somebody, was it Chris, you said about the trains being closed? I was told by one of the main guys in NIR at that time that they reckoned that they could sustain the train service for another 3 weeks before we went and met them. He told me that day. He said, we think we've about 3 weeks left. And then, of course, that changed it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Very briefly, yes, I was involved right at the beginning with Proinsias' meeting in Dublin, in O'Connell Street, and very enthusiastically supported the proposition. I think several key things were involved, and Chris has talked about them, the single issue and taking on the absurdity of an organisation seeking to unite Ireland by dividing it. Another important thing, I think, for us and for me was nominating Sam McCautry and Paddy Devlin leading the committee, and their choice, it was an inspired choice as far as Sam was concerned, selling the whole message, and also Paddy as well. I have to say I was warned when I went into a meeting with Paddy because I didn't know him. They said, watch what you say to him, because if you're cheeky to him, he'll hit you a thump. So I was always very polite when Paddy Devlin was around. I think we did make a difference. I understood from the first meeting with Proinsias, several thousand jobs were involved, actually in jeopardy because of this. And it was an issue, therefore, that was able to unite large numbers of people. And our trains, I don't know how many were on the train, maybe 1,000, whatever it was. I remember the trains coming to Belfast and marching from Central Station round to the City Hall. 1,000 people set out, maybe 300 or 400 reached the City Hall, and Marks and Spencers and C&A's did real good business. But I mean, that was just a byproduct. The key element in this was peace, and that's what we're working for, and that's still the key element. And it is by no means a certainty. It is by no means something that you can take for granted. And Northern Ireland is in a particular issue, difficulty at the minute. So I think it's always important that we campaign for peace, we think about peace, because that's about reconciliation and tolerance and so on. And we were able to show working across border without threatening anybody or our political situation. We were able to work together for a common aim and a common good. And as Sam used to say, we actually delivered as far as stopping the attacks on the railway line. Thanks very much.
Thanks. I'm going to ask Alan McGuinness if you want to say a few words.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Liz. First of all, could I thank Connal for his wonderful work in organising this event today. I think it's marvellous, and it brings back wonderful memories of the peace train and the various journeys that we made, and the wonderful conversations that we had in terms of politics. That's one of the byproducts of the peace train, that people of differing and very different political points of view were able to discuss issues and find a consensus in relation to those issues. So it was a great experience for me, a great experience for my colleagues, people like Sean Farron, Alistair MacDonald, Alex Atwood, and of course Paddy Devlin was very much someone that we admired and respected, even though he had left the SDLP. But nonetheless, it was important. His presence was important. And it was, again, part and parcel of that discussion that was very, very important. And in a way, prefigured the peace process here in Northern Ireland. Michael has referred to, Michael McGimsey has referred to the absurdity of the Provisional IRA campaign, that you, in order to unite Ireland, you divide the people of Ireland with bullets and guns and explosives. And I suppose this is the most absurd example on the part of the IRA of dividing people. But here's a railway line that connects the two major cities in Ireland, and they seek to destroy it. I mean, absolutely absurd. It like something out of the theatre of the absurd. You know, you couldn't really make it up. But that's what we were fighting against. And I reflect on what's happening at the moment, where there's a lot of discussion in the post-Brexit period about hard borders. Well, this was the hardest border, and the people that invented the hard border were the Provisional IRA. And we should always remember that, and we should be saying to them, whenever they fraudulently, in my opinion, go on about hard borders, you were the people that invented the hard border in Ireland. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm Michael Nugent, and I was involved with the peace train and also with the New Consensus. And I think I want to say that, Proinsias, I mean, you really were the person that made this happen. And what it wasn't just the idea, it was you were one of the few leading politicians who were prepared to put aside party political advantage. And I remember Eamon coming down to one of our New Consensus meetings and saying, can you help with the Dublin end of this, and putting us in touch with Chris and John de Corsier and so on, and specifically saying, you know, we don't want to be taking party political advantage of this. We want this as a kind of people's movement. And so that was absolutely key. Like, there's very few politicians that were prepared to do that. There's just two anecdotes that I just want to share. One was the first one, as Proinsias was saying, it was when we were coming back that the bomb scare was, and we were stopped in Uri, and you were supposed to, the tradition was you'd get on the bus to Dundalk, but we said no, we're going to stay here. And of course, this being Ireland and people being up from Dublin, a lot of the people were down in the pubs in Uri. So we had to try and find them. And while we were doing that, Chris and I were waiting in the car park, and the police were kind of freaking us out because they were saying, look, we need to move you back to Portadown because there's some local Republican area here, and it's pretty dangerous. And then the police moved on. We were just myself and Chris there. And then suddenly this car came screeching in, like some sort of, police TV series thing. Screeches to a halt. Two guys get out and come briskly over towards us, and Chris and I are glancing at each other. And it turned out it was two members of the Workers' Party checking that we're okay. So that worked out. But it was really, that first one was really the most. The first one was really the breakthrough, because I remember, because we spent all night in the train in Portadown, just people that didn't even know each other, talking politics until the early hours of the morning. And there were so many friendships forged on just that particular night. Obviously carried on through the rest of the thing. But the big thing I think that that the various groups that Chris was mentioning made, there were two different dynamics. There was the dynamic in Northern Ireland of actually challenging the paramilitaries, on their doorsteps. The dynamic in the Republic of Ireland, I think, was making them realise that they couldn't achieve political success in the Republic while they were still killing people. And that was, I think that really made a difference in the Republic. They just didn't know how to react to it. I remember one time we were picketing the Sinn Féin offices in Parnell Square. And it was after one of the atrocities, and we chained ourselves across the gates. And one of them arrived and started threatening us. First of all, he started threatening us to move. And we had told the police, there was a policeman across the road, and he said he was going to get us removed for trespassing. So he's walking across the road to get us removed for trespassing. And I think it was Brian Brennan shouted after him, informer, collaborator. He just stopped in the middle of the road and then just headed off to get instructions somewhere. So I think that the dynamic that as Chris was saying, it was really a small number of people wearing different hats in different groups But I think the difference that we had, thankfully, was disproportionate to our numbers. And that was because, as Chris says, because it captured the public imagination and even, the Shinners had to recognise that that dynamic was happening.
Thanks very much indeed, Michael. Chris mentioned that it was old men drooling or not drooling, but there's a few old ladies here, and maybe one of them, or a young woman indeed, if you'd like to comment. I'll bring it down to you. Oh, thanks, Conal.
Hi, I'm Sheila Hanley, and I was just an ordinary trade union activist who was sort of lured into the peace train via my friendship with Chris and Isabella. And as being a trade union activist at the time, as I think our colleague from Great Britain said, the majority view was essentially unthinking republicanism and a sneaking regard for violent republicanism. So I went on all of the peace trains. I was heavily pregnant on one of them. On another one, I was with that baby in arms. And my trade union colleagues would say to me, "Are you not afraid?" And I would say, "But surely the question, if I was to be afraid, it's because of the antics of your so-called mates. So it's not, why am I not afraid? It's, why are you not ashamed?"
Of course. Oh, wait, no, somebody else. Yeah. Go on ahead, then. Don't forget to give your name.
My name is Jerry Granger. I was lucky to have been able to participate on a minor level as a participant in the peace train as a member of the Workers' Party. And there are just two very brief points that I want to make. The first is this, that I'm very glad to be able to participate and to listen to people make their contributions in this meeting today, because it's very important that I think the narrative of the peace train is kept and preserved. Unfortunately, in Northern Ireland, we see it, for example, in relation to the civil rights movement. There are attempts by people, such as Sinn Féin supporters, to completely change the narrative of what the civil rights movement was about. And I think they would like to forget that there was a peace train organisation. And I think it's a testament to the reality of the peace train organisation, the great work of the peace train organisation, and the fact that people are still proud to have been participants in the peace train organisation that we are here today. The second point that I want to make very briefly is this. There is somebody else who hasn't been mentioned so far today, who passed away on the 12th of this month, who was an active participant in the peace train, and that was Councillor Tom French of the Workers' Party in Craigavon. Tom passed away just 2 weeks ago, and I know that had he been able to be with you, he would want to certainly pass on his regards. Thank you.
I'm very sorry to hear that. May you rest in peace. I just want to give Eileen Bell a minute.
If that's okay. It's just that going on from what Jerry said there, the IRA were, I don't know whether I'd say it, they were scared of us, but they were certainly aware of us and the work that was done and the number of people that were on the trains and the support that we had from everybody. And of course, they were also worried about the union support. I think Chris touched on it. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to get the peace train off, even from the start, if we hadn't have had that union support. But one of the things that I will say on a personal level, my previous job to that was in the Peace People. And what I did was on a Tuesday, Wednesday, I went to, with the Peace People bus, I brought the families of the people who were, as you can imagine, the jails were full at that time. And we were bringing families up that couldn't afford the price of a taxi from the Lisburn station, which would have been the normal thing. And I was the one made sure that when they got on the bus, I went round up the falls, up the White Rock, right round over to Kernmartin, up the Shankle Road, and up all those right across, and told them in no uncertain terms that when they got on the bus, we were there to go to their relatives. They weren't there to have discussions about, you can talk about what things your life is, but I don't want to have any political or otherwise. And I asked them at the time, whenever John Alderdice asked me to be a delegate in the talks, the political peace talks that started in 1990 in Stormont, if they would want me to go there. to the talks, and they said, yes, go and tell them what we are going through. So that's one of the reasons why I went on there. But the other thing that I can say, the point that I wanted to make was, I got phone calls from both sets, shall we say, because I was taking some of their passengers off on my bus. And they were very annoyed, and they continually threatened me and was told I was on a list. Then when I came into the peace train, I happened to meet Martin McGuinness one day, and I sort of said to him, you know, he was going around with something like Jerry Adams has done, saying, you know, that he wasn't really a part of the IRA. And I said, how can you say that, Martin? Because I was a front, and I went up to a meeting in Derry where you were, and you were the chair of it, and you were the... So he said to me, oh, but that was different, that's community work. So I got a phone call when I was into the peace train office the next day, and he said, you're not allowed to say things like that to Martin. And I said, but sure, you've given up your arms, there's no arms, you can't do anything. He said, oh, we can put you on a list. And I said, well, I'll just tell you, I'm already on a list, so will you check that list and see if that list is still current? But he answered me with an expletive, and you can imagine what it was. So I just thought I'd let you know, they were concerned about us.
Sorry, my name's Declan Lagan, also a member of the Workers' Party, and just, I was going to mention Tom French because I was at his funeral, and I always think of Tom at it. He was very, very significant in that particular thing on the peace train. Even if you're talking about in recent times, he was still talking about it. I have a daughter who teaches. She's actually been talking about the peace train recently in school to try to bring people and get the memories. She was on the peace train. So it did make an effect on younger people. The fact that she's bringing that into the next generation, she does remember it. And I think it's also important to remember the two, like Sam and Paddy, both from good working class backgrounds. And I think it was the working people who made that peace train work for the sake of the workers who worked in that peace train and for the sake of their jobs. So we have to remember, maybe perhaps we could do a community relations booklet and put it into the schools after this is over. Get community relations to sponsors and put that into the schools.
Good idea. Okay.
My name is Fergus Whelan. I think a lot of you know me, but I was involved in the trade union movement at the time. And one of the things that struck me was the peace train was a great draw for young trade unionists. You know, young trade unionists got the message really easily, and they came onto the peace train in the hundreds. And I think it was great for their development as well, because at the time there was a lot of nonsense being talked in the trade union movement about the troubles in the north. But just on a slightly sort of lighter note, I wasn't there, so I can't swear that this is true. But Rhonda Donaghy, who was mentioned earlier on, said that she went as a part of the peace train delegation to meet Jean Kennedy Smith up in the Phoenix Park. And Jean Kennedy asked where they parked the peace train, where they weren't using it. But one thing that I was there, and I can't tell you this is true, at one stage, on one of the late ones, I think it was probably one Michael talked about, that got stopped that way, there was a difference of opinion between some people who wanted to stay till the line was cleared, and then others who had to get up for work in the morning. You know, so there was some people didn't have the luxury of grandstanding or whatever. But when Eamon Dunphy, in the next week, writing in his column in the Independent, he said, a young Marxist with a beard called me, you know, effing Provo anyway, you know. And I happen to know who the young Marxist with the beard was. It was one of Proinsias' younger fellas from Finglas. And I said to him, sure, you couldn't call Eamon Dunphy by any stretch of the imagination an effing Provo. Oh, he said, I thought it was Eamon McCann.
There's somebody over here. You want to speak? Sorry, I can't see you. Oh, that's better.
Yeah, Henry Robinson, one of the founding members of FATE. See Jeff Maxwell here somewhere, another founding member. So I'm really delighted when Gary invited me, reminded me that this was happening, because I think there's a serious case of whitewashing going on at the minute. And people like the peace train give cover to families against intimidation and terror. The victims of families intimidation and terror, when they rode up and down the train, it was an extra cloak. And the thing that the provisionals, who essentially were the white heat of sectarianism in Northern Ireland, and I endorse what Punchy said, that we were absolutely opposed to all paramilitaries in that campaign. But the thing that we have to remember is that those victims, the families that disappeared, also you remember Maurice Healy. Maurice was tortured, nearly murdered by Adams and McGuinness's pals in Newry. And then Maurice was banned from his own country, but Maurice rode the peace train north and south, surrounded and protected by the peace train people, to the point where his illegal banning was removed. One of the things that, it wasn't so much that we rode up and down the peace train, it was a contradiction. We were showing up a contradiction in the peace train, in the other movements that we were members of. And they didn't mind so much that you were showing them up locally, but when it got internationally, then they got upset about it. They got really upset when it became a sort of international story. And the irony of going up and down the train, blowing it up, was just madness. But looking back in time, I didn't think we made a huge contribution back then because we were all too close to the violence and everything else. But absolutely, this group was the building block, along with other groups, the peace people, Faith, of the other people, in relation to forcing the provisionals to the talks. It really was. It's not some guy, MI5 agent, who told Adams a lie or McGuinness a lie. So I think it's crucially important that we have a look at ourselves, and particularly in the new current peace and reconciliation process, because Sinn Féin don't want to remember this organisation. They don't want to remember what they did. And ironically, when I heard them condemn correctly the murder or the attempted murder of the police officer some months ago, I thought, you sound like the Workers' Party, right? Only that slow learners, it took them so long, and all the damage and destruction. So I think it's really important that a group like this actually has a voice moving forward and tell the young people exactly what happened.
Hello, everyone. Liam Kennedy, Peace Train. Yeah, obviously, as a historian, I would heavily underline the points made by Jerry and Henry and others about the rewriting of the past, which is, and it's proceeded incredibly successfully. I mean, one of the opinion surveys suggested, I can't remember the precise figures now, but around 70% of nationalists believe the armed struggle was necessary and there was no alternative. And I mean, that's an incredible distortion, corruption of the historical truths of the last 50 years or so. While some others were talking, I remembered, well, we've mentioned Paddy Devlin a number of times. I remember Paddy wrote an article for one of the Sunday newspapers, Hughie may remember which one, in which he drew a parallel between the peace train and the freedom train in the United States, 1947, and the freedom rides in the early 1960s. So Connal and co might like to take that on board, the kind of wider comparative perspective on the peace train. And actually, if you went back into the 19th century and the Parnellite campaigns and so on, trains were hugely important in terms of mobilizing popular support for the National Land League and the National League. So there's, in terms of Irish history, perhaps a long historical view, and in a comparative frame, there are freedom trains elsewhere, which perhaps worth bearing in mind. So thank you very much.
Now, how are we doing?
Any other contributions or interventions? Edna Longley, can I kind of, no? I thought it was a very interesting point that was made there in terms of, thanks Liam, in terms of the cultural things of the train. It was Edna who reminded me Louis McNeista's Train to Dublin, the poem, and the contraceptive train in the early 70s. This is also part of the history, and a part of, it's this idea almost of the loco as a progressive force for something, and part of recent Irish social history. Are there any general questions? If we've I heard from Peace Train participants. Is there any general questions that people would have? Now is your chance. We do have another 20 minutes or so.
Just a point of information. I think I have
yes.
just a point of information, because a number of people have mentioned. Now, Bernard would know better than me the class of engines that were used for the various peace trains. But I have a photograph here of one of the engines, and it's now been restored, and it features in Downpatrick Transport Museum. They have a small little line in Downpatrick Transport Museum that runs for about 2 miles. And this engine pulls 2 carriages on it, but they have on the engine Peace Train. So that is actually now there as a symbol of the Peace Train, and they have a display of photographs there, and that's in Downpatrick Museum. Now, I just want to mention something. Since I've been up here and I've been doing different work with different groups, the Unite Union asked me to take part in a campaign against privatisation within the NHS. And I became the patron of that campaign. And we got all the political parties to come in behind us, every political party. The UUP, Mike Nesbitt was particularly helpful at that stage. And I met Martin McGuinness, and I have my photograph taken with him and his MLAs to support the campaign. And then he invited me to speak at an event on the health service up in West Belfast. And there was an anniversary coming up of the Peace Train. And for some reason he knew it because he had seen a piece on BBC television. And he said to me, is there any chance you might run an event for the Peace Train, for the anniversary? And I said, why, Martin? Why ask me this? If you do, will you let me know? Come and talk to me about it, because I might be able to help out some way. And I thought about it, and I thought about it. So I went to Chris McGibsey, and he said, you can park that for the moment. So sadly it never happened, Chris, but you were the one that told me to park it.
That was right.
Okay, are there any? Oh, there is one at the back there. I can't see you. Oh, yeah, sorry. Beg your pardon.
My name's Tony McMullen. I was chair of ICTU Youth at the time here in Northern Ireland, and we were very inspired. Young trade unions were inspired by what was going on in the Peace Train movement. We had our own campaign against violence and against sectarianism called Hands Off My Mate, which went down very well. The only slight problem was that when we were just about to have the press launch, the late Frank Bunting, who was our secretary at the time and who worked for Congress, brought the badges with us, because it was a badge with Hands Off My Mate on it, and Frank had printed all the badges, or published all the badges in red. So the newsletter praised our campaign as that we had adopted the Red Hand of Ulster, and that the ICTU youth were now supporting the unionists. Well, they implied that, but it was great. So it was great to see the different strands of the trade union movement at the time and the Peace Train movement. And Sam McCautry was a very good friend of mine because he was a member of my union before he then became full-time with the Irish Times. And Sam was a great trade union activist, and delighted to see so many people here today.
Thanks very much. Yeah, no, don't worry, I'll look after you.
Is there any other questions
yes.
or comments?
And then I'll do.
One reason why the Peace Train organisation commanded such support, it's for actually personal and cultural reasons. I know Proinsias at the beginning said, your daughter needed that train, and I think the train has played a big part in a lot of family histories and north-south relations. And Connal mentioned Louis McNeese's poem Train to Dublin. There are other Belfast, Dublin train poems and representations of it in literature. And my husband has written one or two of those. And his best-known poem, Ceasefire, which he's actually been asked to read at the Abbey on Sunday, he actually wrote that on the train. But in my own family history as a Dubliner who's lived in the north for a long time now, I was regularly on that train visiting other members of the family in the north going by the boat to Scotland. And I really do think there must have been a lot of sentiment of that kind, and that link in a way with pre-partition Ireland as well. I think there's a lot of pre-partition Ireland in various organisations throughout the land, like the Royal Irish Academy, for example. And I think, you know, more of that should be more built on when we're thinking about future unities of whatever kind.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mary McMahon. I was involved with the peace train, and I think the thing that made the peace train for me was the ordinary women who boarded it. It wasn't the organisers, and that's not taking away from the concept and the actual running of it. It was the fact that ordinary women in their droves turned up at Connolly and Belfast and got on that train, because at that time we had the pound and we had the punt, and women knew best where they got value for money then, and they know it today. So I think it was a powerful confluence of good political ideas, good politics in terms of the running of the organisation, and the common sense of ordinary people to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And thanks to the drivers for keeping it going.
Anyone else? Sorry, is there anybody else who wants to speak now or forever? Okay. Oh, you want to come back?
I just want to say, since it's been 30 years, some people might come to the John Hewitt for a pint after this if they want, or a coffee.
Well,
Henry's in the chair too.
Can you delay the 6 o'clock train to Dublin?
Sorry, Gary might want to say a word, did you?
Very briefly, I mean, somebody had mentioned Jimmy Knapp, and he was also vital when the peace train came to London, because he was the head of the railway workers, and they were in the middle of the strike, but they said, no, we'll help you, and they eased the way with British Rail. And it's very difficult to know quite how these things bounce, but there was a moment here when, I mean, I'm just thinking of the song Zombie by the Cranberries, or Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2. I remember Chris Hudson showing me their favourite bar in Black Rock, the pub that they frequented. What connections there were between these things, I really have no idea, but I should imagine that they were. And I think that this idea that we've come back together, we're rescuing this moment, which was quite an important moment that affected a lot of people and had quite a big impact. And essentially, we've got to make sure that we're not written out of history. You know, if we've done it once, we can do it again. That would be different circumstances, of course, but we mustn't allow this to be sort of interred.
Indeed. Proinsias.
Yeah, just a few points I wanted to make. First of all, I do think strongly that the peace train helped save lives. I've no doubt about that, because eventually they stopped. It came close enough from time to time with, you know, where at least one driver pointed out that within seconds he had avoided death. I think too it saved the line. I think it helped defend democracy, certainly in the Republic of Ireland, and I think it helped demonstrate that people in Northern Ireland also wanted democracy, that they didn't want people to be killing in their name and against them. I think too that it fed into, I have no doubt at all, from conversations I've had since, that it fed into rethinking within the Republican movement itself. And I think therefore everybody who was involved in that process, including all of the women who will never turn up at meetings like this, who played a role in that whole process. But I want to re-echo something that has already been said. You know, that peace is still in a very delicate place. I'm always struck by the fact that when I think about the civil rights campaign and the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland, that you know, when I was promoting that idea within the Republican movement of the time in the 1960s, I wasn't the initiator of it by any means, but that whole idea, never once did I think that it might eventually lead to a position where it would create divisions and create tension and tensions to the point where the provisional IRA would emerge and you would have a sectarian war for 30 years. So I think we have to think very carefully about the initiatives we take. And I think, I'm saying this because I think there is a push at the moment for a referendum about Northern Ireland. In my view, and I've written here and there about this, it would be disastrous. It would destabilise the island, not just Northern Ireland, but would destabilise the island. And I think insofar as we have any influence, we need to push back against that idea. And I think that that's certainly one thing I would like to say today. Two final points. My daughter told me one time that she was collared in Queen's University. She started off in Jordanstown and she ended up in Queen's. And somebody in Queen's said to her, you got a place here because of your dad, you know. And she says, you're serious? My dad, ex-IRA, and leader of the Workers' Party has influence with Queen's? You must be. But anyway, that's my daughter. But one of the things that influenced me, if you like, in terms of the idea of the peace train was that I had on and off attended, I'm sure many people here attended, the British Irish Association in Cambridge and so on. And it always struck me that at these meetings where people were in private, they could discuss things, they could sit around the table, they could argue, they could disagree, and that night they could sing songs, they could sing each other's rebel songs, unionist songs, loyalist songs, whatever, and there was joy and whatever that night. Come Monday morning, they were back at each other's throats. And it seemed to me that we needed to find a way to show that the people on the island of Ireland could also exchange views, could also talk about their differences, could also agree and disagree and sing songs together. And I felt that something like the peace train would help to do that.
Thanks very much, Proinsias. I feel that we're being asked to finish off here, but I have two things.
Any final comments?
Oh,
People are more than welcome.
Great. Well,
I have some photographs here, and I'll just spread them out so people don't take them. They're the only ones I've got, and I'll just spread them out with the posters so people can have a look.
Okay, I have two things then, just to finish off with. One is Michael wanted to come back and say a few words.
Thank you. I just want to say one final thing. I just want to remember my late wife, Anne Holliday, who was on the original Dublin committee. And who, you know, did a whole lot of work, got a lot of the names for the endorsements and so on. You know, obviously she would have been here if she was still alive. One of the things that Anne brought home to me from her background is that she was from the forgotten minority of the partition of Ireland. She was an Anglo-Irish Protestant in the Republic. And whereas in Northern Ireland there was a large enough minority of Catholics/nationalists to keep Northern Ireland a competed political space, there were so few Protestants in the Republic that they essentially had to either emigrate or keep their heads down. So I'd just like to just remember Anne because she made such a difference both in terms of my view of the whole Irish situation and also her work for the peace train. Thanks.
Before I thank everybody, if you're interested, anybody here, there's a very interesting conference this Saturday in Queen's, and it's jointly between the Truth Recovery Process, Messines. I don't know if Harry's still here, Harry Donaghy, he'd have details about it. It's free, it's on, I think, from 9 until 4, and it's essentially looking at, you know, the failures. I mean, there's been an awful lot of talk about the success of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, and that's all very well, but there are areas which haven't been fully dealt with, and that relates particularly to victims. So very good range of speakers. So if anybody wants to come along, it's in Queen's this Saturday, April the 1st. I just want to finish off by thanking particularly our panel for really a wonderful presentation. I mean, this is living history and nobody can take it away from us. But it is important, obviously, that it's recorded, and Connal has made sure that there is a record now. I'd like to thank all of you who've contributed, both by your presence and by your comments. This is a significant part of Irish history. And no matter how effective in many ways the rewriting of Irish history is, and we all are conscious of it, there are enough people, as there are in this room and in other rooms, to make sure that truth will out. So thank you very much indeed.
And thank you so much as well to Liz for brilliantly chairing us today. Just a few final things. Thank you. And just a few final things is it'd be great if we could have, there's a form on the chairs, please, if you can have the time to fill that out, that would be great. And there's a nice moleskin book just to record all the attendees and the names and any comments that you might have. Just the final line, aside from thanking all of you and for the panel, good line to leave you with from the Peace Train organising itself, moving forward, keep the lines open. Thank you.